Hi, this is James Pereira. Now, I got a special treat for you today. A couple of weeks ago, I watched a Netflix documentary known as The Fog of War, 11 Lessons from the Life of Robert S. McNamara. It won an Oscar award, actually, in the category of documentaries. And I think it was released in the year 2003 in the Cannes Film Festival. Now, doesn't matter what you think of Robert S. McNamara, but what I learned after watching, while watching this documentary, was that in fact, all of these lessons from Robert McNamara's life, can be converted into business lessons. And this is what I would like to discuss with you in this slideshow. Number one, McNamara says you got to empathize with your enemy. Okay, that's from a war situation, but from a business perspective, I believe this is absolutely true. Every business person needs to empathize or understand your competition. If you do not understand your competition, you will never be able to beat them, you'll never be able to beat them at whatever game that you're playing. And the example that I have is when the company I was with in the year 2000, we were actually pretty badly down against our competitor known as GSK or GlaxoSmithKline. And both GSK and my company were selling child vaccines. And they had a lead of, I think, about probably 5 years. And we had just launched our new child vaccine. And most of the market was actually in their hands. And what we did was we tried to dig deep and get into the psyche of GSK. And eventually, when we found out what they were doing, we were able to circumvent them and catch a large chunk of the market. We did not beat them, but we got a large chunk of the market. Number two, rationality will not save us. Now, I think every business person would empathize or would appreciate this concept. We all know that people are not rational, although we want to believe that. Okay, people are emotional beings. And there is a concept in coaching where if you want to coach someone, you want them to change their behavior, boost their productivity, you got to understand their emotional why, which means why? What drives them to do a certain thing? What drives them to buy your product? What drives them to do certain things in a certain way? Behaviors are never rational. You may have heard of this saying as well. People buy emotionally, but then they justify rationally. Number three, there's something beyond oneself. Now, every self-help guru, if you have ever tuned into any one of their programs, you would have probably heard them say, don't do things just for yourself. Do things, remember that there is something bigger than you. And usually they use the term your legacy. What is your legacy? What are you leaving behind for your family, for your community, for your nation? And two people always come to my mind when I think about legacy, and it's Steve Jobs and Bill Gates. Now, these two guys did not do things just for the sake of money. They were doing it to change the world. And sure enough, look how far we have come in the last 40, 50 years because of these two guys. The way we do things, the way we interact with people, the way we handle business has all changed. Number four, maximize efficiency. I think this goes without saying. Every business person wants to maximize efficiency. Sometimes we have trouble trying to determine how we're going to go about it. And why do we want to maximize efficiency? Because we want to be more productive. And the more productive we are, eventually we are going to drive higher sales. And more productive would also mean lowering costs, business costs. And therefore, in this two-pronged method, higher sales, lower costs would mean that you have an exponential rise in your profits. Number five is proportionality should be a guideline for war. Now, McNamara was talking about the bombing of Japanese cities during the Second World War. But the way I see it is, how does a business look at proportionality in competition? The story I have for you is way back in 1991 when I launched my first product. And we were competing with Pfizer. I launched the product 9 months before Pfizer. And for 3 years, we were leading them. And at the end of the 3rd year, Pfizer took off completely. And the product I'm talking about is Novas, which is Pfizer's, and Plendil, which is mine. And the reason why we lost, when we analyzed this, is simply because Pfizer was spending proportionally equivalent to what they were planning to achieve, which is domination in the hypertension market. We guys were unfortunately not spending proportionally to achieve that goal. We wanted to beat Pfizer, but we were not spending proportionally in our A&P or in our marketing mix. Number 6 is get the data. What this means is that analyze your data. And this is the sexy term that is being used today is big data. Well, for me, I feel that it is sexy because big data basically means not just a huge amount of data, but even if you have a small amount of data, how do you analyze that? How deep do you dig? The deeper you dig, the more you will actually see. Clarity becomes very evident when you dig deep. And I can give you a couple of examples here. I have a client who is actually in medical device segment. And just like any other healthcare business or maybe any business, they will do a sales analysis. Basically what that means is that they will analyze the product sales on a monthly basis, weekly basis, and even on a daily basis. And they will run the monthly roll. They will do the weekly roll, rolling analysis, and so on. But that's not sufficient. You also have to analyze according to purchase by your customers as well. And also from a geographic point of view, where do your sales all come from? So that's one example. Now, the other thing that most healthcare companies also do is analyze their calls. That means the visits to the customers. And these are called calls analysis. And they would therefore analyze the number of calls that were made on a weekly basis, the number of calls that were made on a daily basis, monthly basis, year to date versus last year, same period, and so on. Now that also applies for the sales analysis. And the other thing that this company did, this client of mine actually analyzed the cases as well. Now because they were in medical devices, a case is considered as a knee replacement. That's one case. Another case would be rotator cuff intervention. A third would be something to do with the wrist. So you can, as you can see here, they have 3 cases here, right? So they will even analyze the cases to see how many cases were done per day, per week, per month versus the last year, and so on. So that's called deep analysis or big data. So get the data and analyze it. Number 7, belief and seeing are both often wrong. How often have we undergone this this experience where we thought what we believe and what we saw are right, but actually they are wrong. We see what we believe and we believe what we see, and very often that is wrong. And this usually happens when we do not do proper planning. And it doesn't mean that if you do a full-scale or in-depth planning, you're going to be able to avoid this. No. Remember that people are not rational, right? So you would see that we sometimes put in our emotions and we therefore see what we believe and believe what we see. And this takes us to the next point. Be prepared to examine your reasoning. What that means is that you may have a certain plan which is based on certain set of assumptions. And when the assumptions are known to be false, then you would have to definitely re-examine your position and change your position. Otherwise, you're going to allow your competitor to beat you. So you can't be sticking to your guns when you're wrong. When you're wrong, change. Number 9, in order to do good, you may have to engage in evil. Now, this may sound terrible, but this is from the perspective of war. What I would like to talk about is from the perspective of business. Example I have for you is that many years back, the company that I was working with, we had a very old vaccine that was given to children. And when I say children, these are babies who are 1 month old, 3 months, and 5 months old. And this was an old vaccine which was about 50 years old at that time. And when you vaccinated the child would develop fever. Not all children, but many of them do develop fever, as well as swelling at the place where the injection was given. So a lot of parents were pretty unhappy with that. But the doctors knew that there was nothing that could be done because that is the way the vaccines were developed. Many years later, we actually came up with a new vaccine and improved technology, which had lower levels of fever and almost no swelling of the baby's arm. And what we decided to do was that since this is a very good product, which costs about 3 to 5 times more than the old one, we decided to discontinue the old one and only make this new vaccine available. And as you can guess, every doctor who was using this vaccine was up in arms against this. And because they had to charge more to the patients or to the parents of the patients, they were also up in arms with the doctors. Eventually, the doctors reported this to the authorities, and after a lot of tussle, the authority decided that, well, this is a free market and we can do what we believe is in the best interest of everyone. And we stuck with our guns and we won. So, in a way, that's what I feel in business is quote-unquote doing evil in order to do good. Number 10, never say never. This reminds me of a James Bond movie, Never Say Never Again, by Sean Connery. How often do we business people say, I will never do this? Well, and very often don't we pedal back and actually do what we said we will never do? Well, I think this is a good point. Never say never, because very often we are going to be eating our words and actually doing what we say we will never do, simply because of changes in circumstances. The last point Robert McNamara made is that you can't change human nature. Now, how often is that true? I think I mentioned that earlier, that you can't change human nature. And that is related to point number 2, which is rationality will not save us. Human beings are not really rational animals. Although we all may think we wish that humans were, but they are not. We are emotional creatures. We buy emotionally, and this is not just in purchasing, but also in employment. We employ people who we have a good chemistry with. We promote people with whom we have a good chemistry with. If we can't work with someone, if we just use the scientific method 100%, if we are entirely objective, we will never get the ball rolling. Organizations will never function completely. So that's the X factor, the chemistry between people. And we all know that the internet was supposed to have changed and shut down all the retail outlets. It hasn't happened. Walmart was to have shut down every mom and pop retail outlet out there. Hasn't happened. Amazon was supposed to have closed down every bookstore. It hasn't happened yet. Why? Simply because all of these, human nature is such that we still want to use our 5 senses when we buy and when we interact with people. And that would be seeing, hearing, feeling, tasting, and smelling. A lot of new research comes out that people go back to shops because they want to utilize their 5 senses. Although they may buy online, but to check out the product, they have to do it using their 5 senses. So, you can't change human nature. And finally, I love the saying by Jack Welch. Business is simple. Very often, we entrepreneurs, business owners, as well as managers, feel that we need to complicate things. I think it gives us a certain sense of grandeur when we try to complicate stuff. But I think it defeats the purpose. It makes things very unsavory for our customers, as well as for our employees, our suppliers, and therefore business is going to suffer. So keep it as simple as possible, stick to the fundamentals, and business will boom. All right, that's it from me, and I hope these 11 lessons have been useful for you. Bye-bye.